Lately, not a week or even a day goes by without some Marvel news shaking everything up. The latest, late Thursday night, was news that the next two Avengers movies would be delayed over 7 months, despite promises not to postpone them again. Let me remind you that this is actually the third time Secret Wars has been postponed. When it was announced at Comic-Con in July 2022, the movie was supposed to come out on May 7, 2025. It was then pushed back to May 2026, then May 2027, and finally landed in December 2027. That should be its final release date. That's a delay of more than 2.5 years. And even though I'll admit it annoys me as a content creator, it makes perfect sense, due to the many changes and crises Disney and Marvel Studios faced. So, is it a good or bad decision? What are the real reasons behind this change? And most importantly, what will it really mean for this phase, which still remains a total mystery today? That's what we're going to analyze in detail in this new video. Because I know it, they postponed it to harm me. I bother them, they want to discredit me, I tell way too much truth. No, obviously I'm kidding. Even my comic book seller doesn't know that I make videos, but still, it's crazy how lately I feel like I'm writing a soap opera. A real Marvel miniseries where the plot changes every week. But rather than contradicting itself, this video series will mainly allow us to add, little by little, details, theories, and context about what's ahead for us. And to answer a first question, yes, I think it's not only a good idea, but above all, the only way to save the studio among maybe 14,605 other crappy possibilities. You can really see that the return of Bob Iger and his pragmatism is probably what the MCU was missing. As usual, we're going to talk together about past, present, and future projects. And so we're entering the spoiler zone, the danger zone. You're with Kevin Buchart, your favorite theorist for your favorite multiversal movie. No, wait. For your favorite street level movie. Wait, right, Moti. You report, you know what? Forget it. The favorite theorist of your favorite Landry? Credits. Marvel fatigue. The year 2025 might be the last for Marvel's worn-out formula. 9 projects are planned, but of the 4 released so far, not all can be considered true successes. Captain America: Brave New World is clearly a troubled film that fails to tell a real story and to establish its Sam as the new captain and leader of the Avengers. Despite critical acclaim and being a good film, the Thunderbolts didn't attract large crowds. It achieved the 3rd worst box office score of the franchise, just behind the industrial disaster The Marvels and The Incredible Hulk. On the series side, the year started with the pleasant surprise, Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, which gave a real fresh take on the character. But let's remember, it's not canon to the MCU. And then there was the return of Daredevil, which is, let's be honest, also a troubled project caught between the old and the new direction. 2 projects that, despite their strengths and weaknesses, didn't really find their audience. Daredevil is even one of the least watched Marvel series on the platform, less than Akata or Lelong, for example. And if we compare it to a hit like Andor, we can see that the Star Wars brand seems less damaged for the general public than the Marvel brand, and just look at what's coming up for Marvel in terms of series. Coming soon, Iron Earth is already considered a flop. The trailer has twice as many dislikes as likes, with over 350,000 dislikes. Yes, you guys are being harsh. There's a series in Marvel that they clearly want to get rid of as quickly as possible by releasing all the episodes in just 2 weeks. In short, yes, something has been happening for the past few years. And Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, who returned in 2023, is fully aware of it. That's why a lot of announcements have been made in recent months with a very clear message: quality over quantity. As a result, he has drastically reduced the release schedule. We're going from 3 to 4 movies plus 4 live-action series per year to just 1 to 3 movies and 1 to 2 series at most per year, limiting the number of projects to follow by refocusing on a clear main storyline. In the same way, Marvel Studios has been split. The studio handles the movies with Feige still at the helm. But now, Marvel Television is rising from the ashes and is joined by Marvel Animation, both led by Brad Winderbaum for Disney Plus projects. Showrunners have finally been appointed for each series, which is standard but wasn't previously done at Marvel. He also confirmed that the Disney series will no longer be necessary to follow the continuity of the MCU. Some major characters might make an appearance, but we'll never see a case like WandaVision and Multiverse of Madness again, where an average viewer who hadn't seen the series was completely lost when it came to Wanda's personality change. But most recently, the Thunderbolts case was a huge shock. While everything seemed to be going well, positive test screenings, relatively high press ratings, a well-oiled marketing plan, even a spoiler revealed 3 days after its release to tell everyone that it's actually an Avengers movie. Still, The audience didn't show up and Thunderbolts isn't profitable. And yet, the movie is good. It's beautiful, well acted, touching, and the characters work. But this shows the whole problem. The Marvel brand is no longer enough to sell. There have been too many mistakes and lies. And what threatens Marvel today is what killed the big franchises before it, the loss of trust. Because I think I'm finally starting to understand the people who say the MCU died after Endgame. Actually, what died is the keeping of promises. We come out of each project thinking they should have done more, done better. And every project ends with a promise bigger than the movie itself. Multiverse of Madness, for example, only lets us explore 2 universes. When the post-credit scene promises us a real journey into a dying multiverse, Love and Thunder ends with the promise of a fight between Thor and Hulk. When the whole movie is pretty dull and Gore never even kills a god on screen. And the worst part is that these post-credits never led to anything. Even the end of Spider-Man No Way Home, which finally promises us a street-level Spider-Man like in the Sam Raimi saga, could very well end up leading to some multiversal mess. Anything is possible. The Infinity Saga had some mediocre movies, but the story always progressed. Every promise and post-credit scene led straight to the next film, keeping us excited for what was next. When the movie Eternals teases the arrival of Eros, Thanos' brother, whom we'll probably never see again. For what purpose, really? Like me, who didn't believe in Marvel fatigue, Bob Iger had to face the facts. It's real, and things need to change quickly, or the franchise could be ruined for good, just like what happened before with Warner's DCU before James Gunn arrived. Even though live streams about Chairs or RDJ's announcement broke the internet, people still aren't going to the movies. That's the real issue. And the worst part is, I unfortunately think that the Fantastic Four movie is really in danger. Apparently it even had to go into emergency reshoots. Yes, nothing has officially changed about the movie, it still looks just as awesome, innovative, and appealing. However, Thunderbolt's relative failure suggests Marvel's situation may be worse than expected, and simply bringing back the Fantastic Four might not be enough. According to some insider reports, Kevin Feige, the head of Marvel and the mastermind behind the MCU, is under huge pressure from Bob Iger. Iger, known for his pragmatism, is reportedly clear-eyed about the situation, with strategic disagreements arising particularly over future X-Men projects. Feige wants an intimate film focused on the social story around the mutants. Iger, on the other hand, wants a spectacular comeback, a movie on the scale of an Avengers film. And even though I would love to have a film about the social aspect of the X-Men, honestly it's hard to say Iger is wrong. The MCU is at its best when it makes its movies feel like events and builds excitement. Look at Infinity War, Endgame, No Way Home, Multiverse of Madness, or recently Deadpool and Wolverine. And now that Marvel has all its characters and unlimited possibilities, every movie absolutely has to be a celebration. Yes, with fan service, large-scale events, and tons of characters, Marvel has never worked with auteur films or A24 style movies. It worked because it was Marvel. And it's time to go all out, just like in the comics. Do crossovers and not be afraid to use those comic stories on a really large scale, not just in projects like Secret Invasion. This time, without Secret and without Invasion, because we all want to relive those moments. We want to feel crazy emotions in a movie theater. Because that's what Marvel is about. We laugh, we shout, we cry, and damn, we own it. Marvel is for everyone. It's huge. And honestly, it should stay that way. Well, even though we're obviously not against it, well-written characters and plots where you can't guess the ending in the first 5 minutes, I'm not saying we should only make cliché superhero movies either. We can definitely have different kinds of movies. You know what I mean? I'm just talking about going back to something grand. And that's probably one of the reasons why Disney decided to postpone Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars, which are the key to really reviving an MCU people have soured on, the biggest movie of all time. Avengers Doomsday could very well mark Marvel's return to its roots, but that's not all. It seems like we're looking at the most ambitious movie in the history of cinema. Finally, while waiting for Secret Wars, which is clearly going to be a giant sandbox where absolutely anything is possible. As of today, Doomsday could feature between 60 and 70 characters, and a recent report says it could cost nearly $1 billion. So, is that true? Personally, I have no idea, but to give you an idea, Infinity War had a budget of $295 million Endgame, $356 million Multiverse of Madness, $351 million, and for the past few years, it's been more like between $200 and $250 million per film, so yes, $1 billion is a lot. It's actually completely crazy, but with 60 to 70 characters and a Robert Downey Jr. at $100 million for 2 films, well, why not? And even if this budget is split between Doomsday and Secret Wars, it would still make it the most expensive film in history, ahead of Star Wars 7 and its $445 million budget. And as I already said in my last video, this film carries a colossal weight on its shoulders. It's supposed to wrap up most of the storylines of the current saga and kick off the MCU's next era, actually introduce us to two new Avengers teams, and introduce us to Doctor Doom, whom we've never heard of before. Explain why he looks like that, why he's connected to the end of Endgame. Yes, that's what the Russo brothers said, but also set up a conflict between the old X-Men, the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, the new Avengers, and Doctor Doom. Explain the mess of the collapsing multiverse, include Loki, and remind us why he's there, where he stands. For those who haven't seen his series, actually introduce the TVA to everyone. And according to rumors, include a Chris Evans who would play 4 different Captain Americas and an RDJ in several versions of Tony Stark and Doctor Doom. Wait, I'm not done yet. Some heroes would also need time to be convinced to join Doom's side and for him to gain incredible powers himself. He knows where they are, and at the end of the universe, they managed to recreate a new universe, Battleworld. The movie's length, 1 week, 3 days, and change. No, I'm exaggerating, but you get the idea. Everything was supposed to release in under a year, so all these reasons clearly delayed the movie. By the way, according to the Variety article that broke the news, the movie needs more time to be truly gargantuan. I love that word. With that budget and the recent movie results, they can't afford mistakes. Those are 2 strong reasons, but not the only ones. I think we're dealing with a much deeper consideration, and to ensure this success, the delay actually only brings interesting options to make these movies the most incredible in history. An inevitable delay? In addition to the production and post-production time needed to make at least a good movie that isn't rushed together, the Russo brothers reportedly don't even have a finalized script for Avengers Doomsday, which obviously causes some problems because the Russo brothers' announcement at the last Comic-Con actually happened just a few weeks after they signed on with Marvel. Since then, everything has moved quickly. They began working with Stephen McFeely on the script, and the first contracts have reportedly been issued. We're talking, let me remind you, about at least 60 characters, and for now only 27 have been announced. Well, only? You know what I mean? Much of the story still relies on the actors' availability and willingness to return, especially since Christopher Nolan is filming with half of Hollywood, including Tom Holland. And Marvel absolutely wants to have their Spider-Man in Doomsday, which makes sense. So it was planned that some scenes would be shot with his stunt double Cascade to let him juggle between the 2 shoots. Maybe that's a bit too ambitious. And on top of that, that's where things get stuck. Brand New Day, the Spider-Man movie, was supposed to come out after Doomsday. And that was a huge problem because one of the things fueling this Marvel fatigue is exactly that. On top of the pointless series, movies without stakes, and a totally messy handling of the multiverse, there's the complexity of continuity. I'm telling you, even we don't know anymore. When a movie is set, the order to watch them, or why the timeline keeps stretching like old chewing gum. Doomsday is set for early 2029, but Spider-Man 4, originally planned to release afterward, was intended to bridge the 5-year gap between No Way Home and Doomsday. So it should have taken place before while still being after, with Tom Holland in Doomsday. Basically, by leaving it like that, you were putting not only Spider-Man 4 at risk, but also Doomsday. And with this shift, there are no more problems. Spider-Man can be a true street-level movie without addressing Doomsday's consequences. And Peter can appear in Avengers without having to explain in that movie what he did between 2024 and 2029, especially since there's little chance that movie will also be delayed, simply for legal reasons. Yes, Sony would lose the rights to the character if the movie takes too long to come out, so the script for Doomsday will be simplified. And honestly, that's what made me say in my previous video that another Avengers movie was missing. Doomsday was too alone to set everything up before Secret Wars. Now, everything seems to be falling into place. The Fantastic Four can reintroduce RDJ's face. I'm just saying that because I can really see him showing up as Tony Stark at the beginning. Spider-Man 4 could really focus on Peter and put him in the best position for a strong duo with Doom, possibly with the black suit so he can wear it in the 2 Avengers movies after that. Doomsday could introduce Doom masked and armored from the start in a showdown with the X-Men, as I mentioned in my last video. We then see him become a manipulator, using the Avengers and Fantastic Four against the X-Men before revealing his true identity. And even if the movie has to focus on Doom, this manipulator role can ultimately be prominent in Doomsday, and his origin story could then be explored in more depth in a later film. For example, a Doctor Strange 3 that would then fit perfectly between Doomsday and Secret Wars. And honestly, when you see that back then, Captain Marvel, an average movie with a character absolutely unknown to the general public, made $1.13 billion. Because it was between Infinity War and Endgame, they're clearly not going to miss out on a quartet of Spidey, Doomsday, Strange 3 and Secret Wars. It would just be too profitable. Or maybe an Avengers trilogy. We'll discuss that after, since there are still many things to cover to understand the delay. This delay lets them rework the announced movies and add one or two others, giving the narrative and Doomsday more breathing room. But we also have to take into account what's happening outside the MCU. Doomsday, in addition to being filmed at the same time as the next Nolan movie, was supposed to be released opposite it. And as things stand, the Nolan movie probably would have crushed Avengers Doomsday. It's a historical epic with half of the most bankable actors in Hollywood and the most acclaimed director. So yes, with the delay, Doomsday is now right in the Christmas slot against Dune 3. Not ideal either, but if you have to choose, you have a better chance against the third installment of a niche sci-fi than against the Nolan juggernaut. And I'm not even talking about the release of GTA 6, which is literally going to eat up a huge share of the audience in May 2026. And that's not all. Marvel has always had 4 very specific slots at Disney: February, May, July, and November. Except for the November slot, the one they should have been moved to, well, they haven't been doing well with it at all lately. In 2021, we had Eternals. In 2022, Wakanda Forever. And in 2023, The Marvels. 3 disappointments in a row. So Disney decided to move its big movies to mid-December instead of November, the slot for its biggest films, the one for Star Wars and Avatar. So Avatar 3 is coming in December 2025, Doomsday in 2026, Secret Wars in 2027, and Avatar 4 in 2028. And contrary to what we Marvel fans might think, the superhero studio isn't Disney's only driving force. This year, for example, the live-action Lilo and Stitch and Avatar 3 will probably easily make $1 billion. Next year, we've got Toy Story 5 and maybe even Mandalorian and Grogu, which could do the same. And in 2027, it'll be Star Wars Starfighter and Frozen 3 that should bring in the big bucks. That's why it's not really a problem for the studio to delay everything. Because once again, this Marvel fatigue has made the studio lose more money by making movies that are too small, poorly written, and without major interest. The only real success in recent years is honestly Deadpool and Wolverine, which actually has a plot that could fit on a piece of toilet paper, but it's huge with tons of characters. So might as well do a real reset. The writers' strike had pushed back the 2024 releases to leave only Deadpool and Wolverine, and I honestly think this break can only be good for Marvel and its community too. Doomsday is supposed to mark the renewal of the MCU, a fresh start. So they're right to create some anticipation, but especially not to release more shaky, forgettable, or just plain bad movies that could hurt the brand even more. Since they must not only make these movies successful but also restart everything for future films, they need to avoid ending up in another post-Endgame dead end that could be fatal this time. But then, what does this delay look like and what opportunities does it open up? Which movie with Doomsday? In my video last week, I talked to you about my conviction. This Doomsday won't be enough on its own, just like the Fantastic Four wouldn't be enough as a production, and that a Spider-Man movie placed between the 2 Avengers movies is definitely not the right solution. It turns out that this delay actually proves me right, since now Spider-Man comes out first and can include clever elements to introduce Doomsday, but that's not all. The delay has cancelled 3 Marvel movie dates. The first one is February 2026, a date we already knew was cancelled. The other 2 are the November dates, which have been removed in favor of December, so nothing new. We also know that the original date for Doomsday at the end of April has been given to the movie The Devil Wears Prada 2. This means that in 2026 there are no more options for other Marvel movies. So we will have Spider-Man, Brand New Day, theoretically produced by Sony, and Avengers, Doomsday. In 2027, however, for now, there's only one movie scheduled, Secret Wars, on December 15. But the original date for the Avengers movie, May 5, and the date for a Marvel movie scheduled for July 21 have not been reassigned. By the way, I didn't mention it earlier, but moving Secret Wars allows Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse to be released first. It's set for June 2, 2027, so Miles could possibly be brought in as early as Secret Wars. We'll discuss that later. Now, back to the topic. So there are several possibilities to go along with the release of these 2 movies, especially if we refer to the various reports that have come out in recent weeks. I suggest we go through them from the most likely to the least likely, assuming there will be one definite movie and potentially a second one. The most likely is Doctor Strange. Time runs out. As I mentioned earlier, when you refer to the comics, it seems obvious. Time Runs Out is the storyline covering the year before Secret Wars, from the first incursion to the multiverse's end. This storyline follows groups trying to save the multiverse in different ways. The Illuminati, the top leaders among the heroes, fail to make the needed sacrifices. Thanos' Cabal, by contrast, enjoys destroying worlds to save the 616, especially given Doom and Doctor Strange's linked fate. Doom will develop the Black Swan cult, which spreads from incursion to incursion with a secret mission, serving the mysterious Rabu Malal. Strange will also leave the Illuminati, aware that his magic alone won't be enough. He will join another cult, the Black Priests, enemies of the Swans. He will eventually find Rabu Malal, who is actually Dr. Doom and has come to stop him. He realizes that the fall of the multiverse cannot be prevented. Doom is right. It's better to save what can be saved than lose everything. He joins Doom as his right-hand man before and after the multiverse ends. We can also see in the leaked concept art that this is probably what will happen, since Strange is standing next to Doom's throne. In short, this movie would help us understand why Doom manipulated everyone in Doomsday to destroy the multiverse and would give him a real origin story, while giving Doomsday more room to move forward. Especially since Benedict Cumberbatch hasn't been announced for the first Avengers movie yet, and he might not be in it at all, or only appear at the very end, proving that he betrayed his fellow Avengers. So, I see this movie releasing instead of the original Secret Wars date, right after Multiverse of Madness with Claire. If there were a second movie, what would it be? I have several names in mind. The first one is a sequel to Deadpool and Wolverine. We know the movie was a hit with $1.35 billion, and Bob Iger wants to bet on what works today. We also know that Ryan Reynolds is already working on a new Deadpool, even though he said he didn't want to rush into it, and he's actually capable of releasing a movie very quickly. And since Deadpool and Wolverine will be in Secret Wars and are supposed to be the Avengers of the TVA, well, it would make sense. Since they know the void, likely where Battleworld will form, this movie could reveal Loki's answer. Also, Loki is confirmed for Doomsday. Next, a Young Avengers or Champions movie. We know that these characters will appear in Doomsday, and by the way, the Vision series should highlight them. But with Bob Iger's announcements that the series should no longer move the MCU storyline forward, I don't think a series will be enough. The idea now is to go after Wanda by adapting the Children Crusade run, a comic where the Young Avengers try to save the Scarlet Witch from Doom's clutches. And I think Wanda is going to be super important for the end of Secret Wars. Her arc could actually be inspired by House of M, a run where she changes the reality of the world, turning it into a mutant world and giving everyone what they're supposed to desire. But the reality is, she stole everyone's life. And in this run, a child comes to wake up the heroes one by one, reminding them who they really are. And together, they unite to stop Wanda. Well, I think Marvel could reverse the roles, giving Wanda the opportunity to be the one who restores the heroes' memories and who starts the rebellion against Doom, a redemption that matches the scale of her mistakes. And this movie might not be called Champions, but Scarlet Witch, which would make the film a bit more appealing to the general public. Lastly, Thor 5 World War Hulk and Black Panther 3 could add to Battleworld, but their characters are already confirmed in Doomsday. That makes me uncertain. I doubt we'll see any of these movies in 2027. Not in this form, but each could show us life in Battleworld and the start of the rebellion against Doom's barons, who might be the Dark Avengers. Let me write these movies. I'd make something crazy. Anyway, I put these 3 movies together because honestly, nothing stops us from mixing them. Thor. Ragnarok was a movie, let me remind you, about Thor and Hulk, and I thought it was absolutely awesome to have a World War Hulk that also includes Thor's fate. As for Black Panther, I think Wakanda will show up here and there. But for me, Black Panther 3 needs to come back in a real movie outside the multiverse after this reboot with a new actor. It doesn't matter that Ryan Coogler is on fire right now. Finally, among the least likely projects we have Blade, which could very well be made super quickly, but has no reason to be there. A new X-Men, since Kevin Feige and the Russo brothers said that these new X-Men of the future will be introduced starting with these movies, or even a new Avengers 2 movie. I saw the latest results in the post-credits scene hinting at Doomsday. I don't buy it, but there is something that ties everything we've discussed together and makes more sense. The famous Avengers trilogy I was telling you about last week, it's something I still believe in today, and that would make total sense. Rather than looking for yet another concept, a new screenwriter, producers, a director, and so on, it would simply be easier to schedule it for the May 5th, 2027 slot. An Avengers movie that could continue what happens in Doomsday, follow the evolution of Loki and Deadpool's team. Focus on the story of Strange Time Runs Out and the origin of Doom, or maybe show us the story of the Young Avengers who go looking for Wanda. In reality, it would simply be the perfect solution. They could split the 2 Avengers movies into 3 films and create a legendary trilogy like the Lord of the Rings or Nolan's Batman series. An independent trilogy that doesn't require having seen the entire multiverse saga and that connects the old MCU with the beginning of the new one. That would be a guaranteed jackpot. A Phase 7 Battleworld. Sure, 2026 and 2027 have changed a lot, but the dates after Secret Wars haven't. February, May, and November 2028. 3 dates seem to mark the start of Phase 7, though we discussed this in the last video. An unknown insider mentioned that Secret Wars would be divided into 2 parts. But like I was saying, this shift in the Avengers movies still changes a lot of things, and honestly, I don't think that in the current situation, Marvel wants to spend too much time in the multiverse, no matter what that insider says. And like I said, if there is a trilogy, I think it will be a nearly independent trilogy. But if that's the case, then there's a good chance that the chosen movies will be among the ones we talked about earlier. A Thor 5, Black Panther 3, a World War Hulk, or even maybe a Shang-Chi 2, all of it wrapped up by a Secret Wars. Part 2 in November. Despite everything, with this new setup we have, Phase 6 is still much denser than expected, and as a result, changes quite a few things compared to what I said in my previous video. Because here, we would have a Fantastic Four movie that sets up the multiversal foundations. Spider-Man, Brand New Day, shows us the perspective of Earth 616, which is getting ready for this Avengers Doomsday. Doomsday brings everyone together and marks the end of the multiverse. Then, Doctor Strange 3, or this hidden Avengers movie that would help us understand what really happened in Doomsday, Doom's true intentions, and maybe even the beginning of Battleworld. Then, why not have a movie that's a real prequel to Secret Wars to explore life in Battleworld and the beginning of the rebellion? And Secret Wars, of course, which would then come to conclude this saga with an epic finale and the beginning of the MCU's renewal. And honestly, if it goes like that, I'm in, no hesitation. And in this setup, 2028 would mark the launch of new franchises and rebooted characters. Just imagine, first date, an X-Men movie. Right away, filled with cameos to really show that mutants are now an integral part of this new expanded world. Then I could totally see a galactic movie. Why not Nova to lay the groundwork for the Manus and Nihilus threat and introduce this new universe filled with powerful alien empires? And finally, a Black Panther 3 Illuminati, a movie that would bring the greatest leaders of the now united hero teams back into the spotlight, facing an even greater threat. And why not start a real World War Hulk with Hulk returning as a planetary threat? A movie that could give a real place to Namor, Black Panther, Reed Richards, the new Captain, the new Iron Man, and Professor Xavier. Strong leaders in a reimagined MCU, and I think that's clearly the direction we're heading in with the new recommendations from Bob Iger. He wants every movie to become a big event again. And now that we have all the characters, all the licenses, we need to go all out 200%. Anyway, tell me what you think in the comments. And if you haven't seen my theory video about Captain never bringing the stones back, it's right here. And we'll probably see each other next Sunday at 5 p.m. where we'll talk in more detail about what's coming up starting from Phase 7, and it's going to be absolutely incredible, my friends. In the meantime, don't forget to stay curious. That's the secret to being happy. Bye.